So I guess we're
Okay.
live. So hello to
I
3
guess we
people
live.
so far, and 4. Hi, Michael Bailey.
Yes. 12. Okay.
It's
6. No. 12 seconds, not 12
Michael
people.
Bailey from Northwestern University. I think that's
Hello,
that
Mike.
Michael Bailey.
I
Hello.
think it probably is. I think there can only
Yeah.
be one Michael Bailey. All right.
So,
Thank you,
well,
everyone, for joining us. We'll give people just another moment to filter
so
in.
we'll talk about fashion just to vamp.
Yeah.
So I'm
Do you want to
wearing,
do?
there's a person in the back. You might see a cat in the background of mine. I'm wearing this hoodie to honor the Pacific Northwest lesbian style, only with the gay flair because it's cashmere. So,
Hmm. Same. I'm also wearing the hoodie to honor the
yes.
Pacific Northwest.
I was gonna
And
wear the hat, but just in my
yeah.
hair. So,
I like your background there. This is my favorite part of doing Zooms is that I get
mhm.
to peer into
Yeah.
people's houses, and it drives me
This is the
crazy when they blur it. Yeah, give us a
Yeah,
show.
I made these bookshelves here,
Oh,
and
nice.
I wanted to be like a sun, the rays of the sun, but then you can't have bookshelves too close to the ceiling, so I couldn't do the top row. But it looks like those little pins they used to give you on the airplane when you were a kid, the little wings.
Mm,
Any
the
case, I wanted
wings. I like it. I
I
like that
wanted like
couch
happy
too.
colors. Yeah. So
Yeah.
it
Is that
I
couch? Is that is that
it's
cashmere? It looks like cashmere.
it's velour. It's turquoise velour. I call it, so like you go to a home furnishing store these days, everything is white. I call it the war on color. So my goal is to do the opposite, essentially. I look like
It
Will
looks good.
Stansel.
All right, can you guys hear us? Are we are
I do
we
not.
are we breaking up at all? Can you guys hear us? No? Okay. All right. I'm getting a
Okay,
little
let's
bit
just.
of a lag, I believe.
I don't feel it.
Ben, are you hearing me?
I am. You just froze a little. Now you're actually frozen. Oh dear.
Can you hear me, Ben?
Now I can hear you. Your video is
Okay,
frozen.
got it.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm getting okay, shit. You can okay. What about people in the comments? Is my video frozen?
They seem to think it's good. So I figure we should start
Are you fine? Okay, let's go ahead.
talking about
All right,
clothing.
apologies if the video is frozen. You probably don't want to see my face anyway. Okay, so most of you are. Thank you everybody for being here. Most of you are probably familiar with you, Ben Ryan. Ben, thank you for being here as well. You recently covered a malpractice trial that took place in White Plains, New York. We will get to that shortly, but first off, I'm just curious because I don't know the answer to this. How did you get in on this
Mhm.
beat? It was
Yeah.
you sort of appeared one day,
Yeah.
and yeah, go ahead.
A lot of it was because of Jesse, because he was my editor a couple times at New York Magazine in like 2015. So I knew him from that. He's extremely thorough. And then, he came out with a piece in 2018 in the Atlantic, and everyone decided that he was a raging pervert and
It's
a
true.
Nazi and all these things that you know to be true. Um, Kidding, but I tried to sort of not just take everything at face value, but also, remain open minded. You never know, and looked into these things and decided that they were all lying. And so that tells you something when everyone's screaming at you not to look at the man behind the curtain, and
Mhm.
you really want. There's something there, and there was this key moment where I had reported intensely about the monkeypox epidemic that summer 2022. While I also had cancer, so it was like quite the event.
Yeah.
Um, and I had testicular cancer. So, and I wasn't really thinking about it at the time. I only look back later, like, oh, there's like a connection between me having this surgery and just the types of surgery that you have in transgender care. There's sort of an overlap. And in fact, after I had my surgery, I was lying in bed, unable to sleep that night from a headache from the anesthesia. And it was the cover article of New York Magazine of how I got my penis.
Oh yeah,
A-
I remember
And
that one.
it was about this phalloplasty, and I wasn't even making the connection then. But in any case, the end of 2022, that's when all the backlash was really happening to the New York Times' coverage about the
Mhm.
puberty blockers article that Megan Toohey did, and I'm like, well, this reaction seems disproportionate to this very reasonable science article about some reasonable concerns. And then I tweeted about one of the articles in Reuters. They did that series that fall as well in 2022, and it was about how few people are researching detransitioning. And Ross McKinnon, in particular, is one of the only people who does it. He's a trans man at York University in Canada. And I just tweeted very innocuously, gee, it's a shame that people wouldn't study this subject. They really should look into this more. That would be important.
Yeah.
Alejandro Caraballo, the clinical instructor at the Harvard Law School and trans activist, saw this and just went bananas and just savaged me and started making up all the stuff that I had said. And my attitude towards that, most people would be like, I'm not going to say anything else. I don't need this. But I'm like, you're not going to bully me. And again, people, I posted about this the other day. They're like, oh, okay, so this is all just a grudge match. I'm like, no, partly it's just me saying I won't be pushed around, but also that level of aggression and the sort of illiberal attack on journalists and academics' normal exploration of truth That's something I want to push up against, and that tells me that you don't have any other good cards
Yeah.
if you have to be that totalitarian about it.
Yeah. Well, Jesse Singal just joined. Should we kick him out?
Yes,
Okay. All right. Well, glad to have you on this beat. You've done some great
thanks.
work here. Okay. So before we get to the trial, there's been a lot of policy changes
Hmm.
and executive orders and state level bills passed since or implemented since Donald Trump took office. So can you tell us just kind of broadly what is the status
Yeah,
of youth gender medicine at this point?
yeah. So it is, and I
Oh shit.
Oh, sorry, we're back. The
Okay.
pressing thing. We're back.
Okay.
Okay, so Donald Trump too comes along. Very first day, he issues an executive order, says there are only two genders. He says that in his inauguration speech, and just went bananas from there on out. So many different things that he's done, trying to shove transgender females, biological male to identify and present as male, out of women's sports, and he's really ratcheted up the threat. Now it's an official HHS policy that hospitals that provide gender transition surgeries or treatments to people under age 19, and God knows why they picked 19 as opposed to 18, but they did, that they're going to forbid them from receiving Medicaid payments. And so that
Mhm.
is just a death knell to any hospital.
Yeah.
So it started with Children's Hospital Los Angeles I think it was in June, they announced that they were going to close their pediatric gender clinic in July, which they did. So that was run by Joanna Olson Kennedy, the leading pediatric gender provider, and the dominoes have just kept falling across the blue states since then. So Stat News just put out a list at Children's Minnesota, University of Utah, Multicare Marybridge in Washington, Rady Children's in California. That one's interesting because the Attorney General of California has since sued Rady's for, I guess it's under anti-discrimination statute,
Mm.
for closing their clinic. And that's something that Letitia James, the Attorney General in Washington, has also threatened when the clinic started to at least pause their treatments in the beginning of the Trump administration. And so they're being pushed from both sides, these clinics, where on one hand, like, well, we're going to shut down. Children's Hospital Los Angeles said in their internal memo about why they were closing the gender clinic was because we only have so many cash reserves. Even if
Yeah.
they went through some big legal process and they got the money in the end, they wouldn't be able to survive it financially. That would just jeopardize the care for everybody.
Right.
So also the Trump administration has like threatened the FBI on care providers, which is strange because uh, the FBI sent out this tweet asking for people to snitch on anyone who's doing this, but what they were describing was legal in many states
Mhm.
anyway. So exactly how are you going to charge them? But there was all this motion in the summer about how the DOJ was going to use like female genital mutilation statutes to go after these guys. I don't know, but also the FTC is laying the groundwork to go after people for fraud. And one of the ways it seems that they would like to do so is there's a lot of times where care providers will use different diagnosis or billing codes rather than gender dysphoria or gender incongruence, which is the ICD-11 code. They'll use like endocrine disorder not otherwise
Mm.
specified. So you see, like Abbott, the Attorney General in Texas, has targeted one care provider there for using that code after these practices had been banned. So she had to flee the state. She moved to
Wow.
Oregon and had to relinquish her license in Texas because of that. So we'll see about the FTC. So Glenna Goldis, she is a really outspoken lesbian activist, very, very gender critical. And she got fired by the AG in Letitia James the other day because she had been so outspoken about being opposed to pediatric gender medicine. And they told her not to, and they fired her for
Mm.
basically contradicting her boss. So she
Mhm.
just went right over to the Trump administration and has joined the FTC and now will be investigated on behalf of their fraud department. It's one of those things like cut off her head and like, just
Yeah.
a new one grows and it's even more, only become more powerful than you could ever imagine, like that Obi-Wan quote.
So she will
So
not be, invited to Pride this year, I take it.
yeah. So that's the basic gamut,
Yeah.
I think, of the Trump administration. So, so much of we've seen that you guys have covered is this idea. I think of the woke left as being very coercive, aggressive, but coercive, scaring people into submission, essentially. And whereas what we see from the right and the woke right, if you want to call them that, the Trump administration is very authoritarian.
Yeah.
So I think it asks the question, why do, say, heterodox podcasts like this still exist? And why is there still cause, or why should we be criticizing the left, say, from the left? And for me, the answer to that is, well, you want us to just lower the standards for everybody else because those guys were worse. What happens when the pendulum swings that way?
Right.
Everyone has already been given this permission to keep doing all this stuff that's coercive. So
Right.
I find that to be a flimsy argument.
Yeah, I think Jesse and I agree on this. We've both made it clear that as bad as the woke left was, and their sort
Still
of
is.
HR it is in their HR reign of terror, there's something fundamentally different about, implementing these same tactics in the federal government in the way that the
Hmm.
Trump administration has done it. But
Right.
let's get to this trial. So, this, this let's just why don't you just get into it? So you
Yeah.
wrote this piece for the Free Press about an 18-year-old, now 18-year-old detransitioner who goes by the name Fox Varian. Well, she's had many names. Currently, it's Fox. She sued the surgeon who performed her top surgery slash double mastectomy. His name is Simon Chin. She also sued her psychologist. His name was Kenneth Einhorn. So let's just start at the beginning.
Yeah.
Who is Fox? Varian? Wait, Fox Varian, Varian
Yeah.
Fox. Fox.
Fox Varian.
Okay, got it.
So we've heard this so many times that the predominant sort of phenotype of people who present at pediatric gender clinics, or some version thereof, is a natal girl who has autism, many other psych problems, and has a real hard time of it after starting puberty, and then starts questioning their gender. Whereas historically, it was a very small population, largely natal males,
Mhm.
gender dysphoric from a very young age, etc. So she belongs, part and parcel with that group. She had a very troubled childhood, a lot of difficulty emotionally and in school and that sort of thing, difficult separation. Her parents separated when she was 7, and they had a 3-year custody battle. She became estranged from her father. So she started seeing Dr. Einhorn, the psychologist in the Westchester area where they all live, and she's about 14. And then at 15 and a half, the first time she ever mentions it, she says, I think I want to change my name to Gabriel, which she saw as androgynous. And then, right after that, I want a binder, and I'm going to cut my hair and maybe change my clothes a little. And then boom, January 2019, she's 15 and a half. She starts socially transitioning in public, tells people at school that she was male, transgender. Only 2 months later, she starts saying, I want top surgery.
Mm.
And it was a real key point in the trial that instead of reflecting on this with her, that he never questioned it. Dr. Einhorn was just gung ho from the beginning. And
And sorry to interrupt you, but he had been
Mhm.
her psychiatrist previous to this
Psychologist, yeah. Yeah, for about a
neurologist?
year and a
Okay.
half. So
Okay,
long
so
history.
right, and
Yeah.
so this, if your dysphoric onset is at 15, this is after the onset of puberty, definitely not the classic case.
Absolutely not.
Or it's
She had
sort
a
of the
real hard
classic it's
time.
the classic ROGD case, not the classic,
Yeah.
toddler who comes
Yeah.
out saying, "I'm real God made me a boy," or whatever.
That term never came up in the trial. There were a lot of things that didn't come up in the trial. There were no politics in the trial whatsoever.
Mm,
So it was really stripped bare of a lot of things, the larger noise that people talk about and are talking about now. But the psychologist was really criticized for ultimately giving tacit approval or even enabling her ideas. And the note that he wrote that March, 2 months, 2019, 2 months after she first socially transitioned and I want top surgery, was about action, looking into how to get top surgery. And it
mhm.
just went from there. So he wrote this referral letter in October of that year to the plastic surgeon, Dr. Chin, and then she had her breast removed 2 months later. And it was really amazing. Dr. Chin was on the stand, and he was a very imperious and elegant man, and he'd gone to all the best schools, and very unflappable. And he was very proud of himself. He said, "Oh, I met with her not once, but twice.
Ooh,
I gave her 2 and 3 outs counting the day of the surgery." And no one took a step back at that moment and said, let's look at this big picture. She's only been thinking about this stuff for about a year,
man.
and you're giving yourself props for over a 9-week period of asking her twice. Like, what if you asked her like 18 times over 5 years and then you remove your breast? I talked to this expert in breastfeeding in Australia, and she was saying, this girl could have 30 years of fertility left in her,
Mhm.
and you're making this decision in such a short period of time. And what really struck me was that one of the only sort of standards of care that either of the defendants would allow was a concrete benchmark, is they thought that that a patient should have a stable gender identity for at least 6 months, which she didn't even have based on these notes of this nonprofit she went to get like specialist trans care. And she was telling them in July, oh, I feel unsure about my gender identity. I feel pressure from all sides to decide, and I'm ready to tell my mother about this. And crucially, even though Dr. Einhorn had sent her there, he never got the notes in that session. So he didn't know about that, nor did Dr. Chin find out about it. And Dr. Chin was very eager to throw Einhorn under the bus, it seemed, said, oh, I wouldn't have done the surgery had I known about this. So,
Okay, let's pause there. Okay,
yeah,
so in general, what is the role of a surgeon when it comes to deciding whether or not they will perform a
yeah,
minor's elective surgery like this? Like, is it the
yeah.
surgeon's responsibility to evaluate the patient's mental health? I mean, obviously, the surgeon should evaluate if the patient understands the procedure and the consequences of the procedure.
Hmm.
That's informed consent.
Right.
But was Dr. Chin typically, are they tasked with also doing a mental health assessment, or do they say, "Okay, we got the note from the psychiatrist or the psychologist, check."
Yeah. It was so hard to pin down anyone on what anyone's role was because the minute they would say so, then you could pin them on not doing it. So that was a very slippery idea. But essentially, everyone seemed to agree, or at least the defense was convincing enough in saying that so long as the bases were covered cumulatively or complementarily by the two parties, that it was okay. But one of
Mhm.
Chin's faults was the letter of referral was just a mess. It was extremely short. He used the wrong diagnosis code, Dr.
Chin
Einhorn.
did or
Yeah,
Einhorn did? Okay.
yeah, Dr. Einhorn. So he said she had body dysmorphia, which
Oh,
is a contraindication for plastic surgery.
right. So
So,
if with
yeah,
for people who don't know this, so body dysmorphia is it's sounds very related to gender dysphoria because it is this discomfort with your body or with a part of your
similar
body.
tenets in some ways.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, but the indicate so, no responsible doctor would if somebody comes with complaining of body dysmorphia, what they don't do is recommend things like surgery because typically, as I'm not an expert on this, but typically my understanding is the dysmorphia can morph or focus on
You're never going to
the
get
patient.
better.
You're never gonna get better,
That's
right.
surgery is not a solution to body
Okay,
dysmorphia.
so Chin
So,
should have seen this diagnosis of not gender dysphoria, but body dysmorphia, and should
mhm,
have right there said, "This is either a coding error or you
right.
have been or you are ineligible for the surgery based on your diagnosis."
Right. So he was very defensive, saying, well, the context of the letter has 7 different points that support that she has gender dysphoria. He never wrote gender dysphoria in his case notes either, by the way, and nor did Dr. Einhorn anyway. So that was a
So
big
she had
mystery.
never been diagnosed by
Not
a
officially, no.
okay, okay.
And so there was this, Einhardt's trying to say, well, so long as she had the presentation of it, that's all that really mattered. And he was very defensive of his notes, Dr. Einhard, saying, like, well, this is why I write them just to jog my memory and that sort of thing. It's not necessarily a full documentation of everything. And to that, I kind of wanted to say, did you ever hear of CYA? The third reason that you're forgetting about what notes are for is to cover your ass when you're in a
Um.
lawsuit, you know? And
Yeah.
and so here we are now. And it was amazing to me Einhorn, there were other words that he had mistaken in his notes, and they were sloppy and that sort of thing, according to the plaintiff's attorney. His excuse for that he said multiple times was, "I'm not a verbal thinker," or some
Mm,
version of that quote. And this brought to mind to me the article in The Atlantic about all those poor Ivy League students, almost half of them who have to get accommodations in their tests because they have some sort of disability that they need extra time. And I'm saying at some point we're going to need to separate from the wheat from the chaff and determine which of you can cut it because one day there will be lives at stake.
right.
You'll be flying a plane or running a major business or, treating a patient who's severely mentally ill and perhaps taking your breaths off. And your inability to use language or to do something, if under pressure is going to cost other people their money or
Mhm,
time. So I found that really shocking that he, as a grown man in his mid 50s, was relying on not that explanation, but that excuse for his frankly inaptitude under at
mhm.
least according to the plaintiff's attorney in his own case notes.
So, tell us, when did so, Fox is 18 now. She got the
She's
surgery at
22. She's
16
22.
22 now. Okay,
Mhm,
sorry. She got the surgery at 16?
mhm, and a half,
Okay,
yeah.
and at what point did she start feeling regret?
Immediately. But this is what she claimed. This is not documented, and the
Mhm.
defense really hounded her about this, that, you saw a couple different therapists after you stopped seeing Einhorn eventually. There were some doctors you saw. No one wrote down that you had regrets. She wrote this college application essay when she was considering going to college about 10 months after the surgery. And what she said, it was, it was great for her. It
Well,
influenced her,
you gotta get into college somehow, and
yeah,
I think
well,
I don't think being a detransitioner, you get affirmative
yeah.
action for that.
Yeah, I was at the sweet spot when like gay was very, sort of cutting edge in 1996 when
Yes.
I applied. So I
Yeah.
wrote about being gay and like just sailed into Columbia. So these days they'd be like, try again. You're gonna
Yeah.
have to look more
Just gay, who
intersectional than
cares?
that, white
Yeah.
boy.
Yeah.
But
Tell us about the parents.
yeah. So her father was estranged, hadn't in fact, first time she'd seen her father in years was when he showed up to court. So I saw
Mm.
them kind of hugging in the hallway, and they made a point of that during the proceedings. But he was only there for, I think, one day, and he resurfaced in the weeks or months leading up to the ultimate surgery, and he had found out about it somehow. And he called Einhorn. He said, "I do not consent to that. I am opposed to this." And he taped that call, which Einhorn didn't know.
And did he
So
have any, medical decision-making power over the
he did.
child?
Yes,
Okay.
he
So
did.
why
It
did
was
so that seems that, like, that should have been a cold stop right there.
Well, yes, good point.
Right.
So he did. He had shared decision making, even though he hadn't, I don't think, exercised it really, but he had that right. The mother, and so Einhorn told the mother and daughter about this, but Einhorn critically never told Chin. And Chin said
Mm,
that again, had he's very eager to throw Einhorn in the bus, it would seem, said had he known this, he would not have done the surgery until he had reconciled this schism. Now, in New York State, only one parent is required to consent under law. That's separate from, of course,
really?
their custody agreement. But the mother just went ahead and did it, and she betrayed, her ex-partner. They weren't married, wishes. So that was sort of on her in that regard.
Mhm.
But crucially, in the phone call, which the father named John Basile had taped, and it was never played for us. There was some suggestion that it might have been, nor did we get any full transcript, with the exception of one quote, which was Dr. Einhorn said to the father, "I don't question people when they want to go through this." And so that was really hard evidence about this lack of questioning and circumspection. And again, it was not said explicitly, but the way I took it was that Einhorn, although he was no expert in this subject, he had no real training in trans care, he absorbed the affirmation
Yeah.
only ethos that the American Academy of Pediatrics and then the AAP or the APAs and all the other organizations absorbed. He was following that mantra,
Mhm.
that you don't question, oh, your gender identity, great, let's move on. And he was really indicted for that, in a civil sense during the trial of saying, why didn't you just explore this more? And, everyone was really demarcating. No one thought that he should have said, you're crazy. Absolutely not. But the example they gave was that the analogy, well, let's say your patient wants to rob a bank. And, at first you'd say, okay, well, what are you thinking? What financial pressures are compelling you to do this? What are the pros and cons? But if they said, like, here's my gun, I'm walking in the bank tomorrow, that's a different conversation. You might
Right.
have to make a call. So somewhere along that continuum of just like total enabling and just being, utterly opposed to something to alienate your patient was his tacit approval. And there was this telling point where Adam Deutsch, the plaintiff's attorney, said, is it important for you to choose your words wisely, especially with a minor, with youth that you're treating? He said, yes, because, if you don't, there could be cases where you give tacit approval, and that might not be in the kid's best interest. And that quote
Right.
just like sunk him. And it was
Yeah.
amazing that he just offered that. Like, yeah, that's the crux of this case is you were offering tacit approval. The kid
Eh
wanted it, but,
right. Well,
you were an
okay,
adult.
so the mom went along with this without the father's consent, but she testified at the trial
Yeah.
that she felt strong-armed into this by
Yes, that's
Einhorn.
right.
Okay, so
So
do you buy that?
I did. She was very reserved most of the time, wore this,
And
like,
she was a
ice.
nurse, right?
Yeah, she's a nurse, but, they try to peg that on there like she was some major healthcare expert.
Mm,
But, she was a practical care nurse, and what they do is they work at people's homes, so she, doesn't have a
yeah.
higher level. She wasn't like an NP, it's a far, like, lower level of authority, if you will, and expertise. But she had, exercised really nuanced judgment calls. She was concerned about vaccine injury, and say what you will about people who are opposed to vaccines, but she had never had her kid had never been vaccinated, for example. So there
Wow,
was that.
that's
Yeah.
the Venn diagram of kids who have never been vaccinated, but who
Yeah.
have had top surgery. That's probably just
Probably just her.
Foxvarian,
Yeah.
yeah.
And she'd pulled her out of all these schools. So, she was
Mhm.
not one to cower in the face of other people's opinions that are in some other position of authority, like a school principal or something like that. But she was very quiet most of the time. You know, it was really painful, obviously, sort of teary-eyed. But when she would remember these scenarios where she was at odds with Dr. Einhorn, and one in particular, she said that he said to her, "You're not in reality, Mom," in that tone of voice. She said he was almost yelling, and that was to say that you need to get with the program, that this surgery, if she doesn't have it, she's
Yeah.
extremely high likelihood of
Yeah.
suicide.
Yeah.
And she said that that was coercive, and ultimately he browbeat her into consenting, but she was always opposed to it. And she went and cried as soon as her daughter was wheeled in to have the surgery. So I
Mhm.
do think that the jury was convinced by this idea of coercion.
Okay. So what this was not, and you explained this in your piece for the Free Press, was an indictment on WPATH
Right.
and the existing standards of care. So I'm sure most of our listeners know WPATH is the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, and there was actually a an expert witness from WPATH who testified
Yeah.
for the plaintiff. So tell us about Dr. Lauren Schechter.
Yeah. So Dr. Lauren Schechter is the head of the gender affirming surgery program at Rush University in Chicago. He has sterling credentials, you know, all of these different great training programs and fellowships and that sort of thing. And he also came across as a very stalwart man. You know, some people would sort of stumble and mumble and stutter and become defensive under cross examination. He barely wavered, and so he seemed extremely credible. And yeah, he's the president elect of WPATH. I think his term starts in November of this year. They have 2 year terms, and one of the most damning things that he said was that these surgeries are a surgery is not in and of itself suicide prevention. No, full stop, he said. The full stop wasn't in the quote, but close quote, full stop. And that was really kind of crushed Einhorn. But the thing is, I had to sympathize with Einhorn because he was only parroting what he'd been told by all
Right.
these other groups. So, and
Right.
among them, people from WPATH. So a lot of people have been really surprised that Schechter was testifying on behalf of the of the plaintiff.
Mhm.
You know, is this some sort of scheme on the part of WPATH to try to right the ship? I don't know, but that's been a subject of much surprise and conversation in the orthopedic gallery.
Yeah, I sort of agree with you. I mean, not having watched the trial from myself, but it's not hard to imagine a clinician, a surgeon, or a psychologist who is not an expert in this field, who is ill-informed because so much of the information out there is bad. So you have to be pretty fully immersed in this debate in order to realize how the standards of care deviate from the sort of popular mantras, would you rather have a dead son or a live daughter?
Yeah.
These faulty suicide statistics. And of course, there is plenty of criticism about the standards of care themselves, but this trial was not about that.
Right. So, and I think this is just a defense strategy that anyone would try. Both the defendants said that there is no standard of care in this
Hmm.
field because it's so new and experimental. And everybody who talked about WPATHs, and it's so confusing, but WPATH literally calls their guidelines, their treatment guidelines, the standards of care.
Right.
And it was a very funny moment where the judge, he's sort of like adorably curmudgeonly, you know? And he's like, I can't remember the exact quote, but it was something like, "What is this? Like, what was WPATH thinking calling the standards of care? That's so confusing. Like, someone get a
Yeah.
message that this is nuts." And I'm like, "Hello?"
Well,
And like,
hopefully Dr.
don't think they
Schechter was
didn't
in the room
know.
when that happened. Yeah.
He wasn't, but I will be reporting this quote eventually. Hopefully, it'll get to him. But um, anyway, the Standards of Care 7, as they recall, came out, I think, in 2013. And so that was what the relevant document was for 2019 when the surgery happened. And then the 2022 Standards of Care 8, that's when that came out. So, you know, it was referenced, but it was never admitted into evidence. And people generally said, like, yeah, it's something on the shelf, you know, and I'll look at it. But, you know, no one really wanted to make it the end all be all. And I think they all had their own motivations for doing so. One, if you're the defendant, if you say, yeah, that's the standard of care, little s, little c, the legal sense, they'll just start reading it to you and note all the ways that you didn't meet those points.
Right.
And, you know, the WPATH people don't want to say that it is because they don't want it to be the crux of the case and to then establish case law where it shows that it's bunk or something.
Okay, were the plaintiffs were their was Fox's attorneys were they trying to make any broader point about gender, what we call or what
No,
people call gender?
no,
Okay. This was
no.
just about this one
Yeah.
patient.
So, in again, say what anyone you will, anyone can disagree with this, but everyone in court explicitly agreed, if it came up, the defense and the plaintiff's attorney, that for some children these surgeries are the right choice. But it
Okay.
was a wrong. So the question is, we've established that this girl was unhappy. And why did this happen? What was the series of faults? And specifically in the legal sense, what was the standard of care? Did you deviate from it, and did that deviation cause the pain, suffering, injury of the plaintiff? And the answer to
Yeah.
those questions, they established where those latter two questions was yes in several points for both defendants. So really, one of the few ways that you had to define the standard of care is just saying what would a reasonable clinician do in your field under these circumstances. That's what the expert witnesses were there to say. It was a little hard because they're all contradicting each other. Yes, he did. No, he didn't. And the jury has to decide who's more credible, essentially. But under cross, Adam Deutsch was able to pressure both the defendants and both of their expert witnesses into admitting that they had deviated from the standard of care in various points. So he sunk them in their own words, and he showed all of this because it's hard. You just 3 weeks of trial, so much information, and he showed slide after slide of everything that they'd said, and he put in red font like the real clinchers. And it was just the most devastating summation where he said, their own words sunk them. And at that, I was like, I don't see how the jury could possibly decide anything but that the defendants were liable.
So what did the jury ultimately decide?
There were several things. So, it was they were faulted both Einhorn for writing the letter that he did, and for Chin for doing the surgery the day that he did. Chin for not reaching out to Einhorn for essentially his process of treating her up to the point that led to the letter. So, and there were a few others. They were interestingly, Einhorn was faulted for not getting the notes from the Pride Center, that specialist care that she'd received twice, but they didn't think that was related to her being injured, despite the fact that Chin had said that had he got them, then he wouldn't have done the surgery when he did. So that was interesting.
So the Pride Center, this is some sort of nonprofit LGBTQ.
In Albany, yeah.
Okay, and what did the notes actually? What did their notes say about her?
That was where she said that she was ambivalent about her gender identity and felt pressure to decide.
Okay, so she told those therapists, but not her actual. Okay, that's interesting.
And Dr. Schechter comes from this multidisciplinary clinic, very well resourced, and then there was Joseph Cerletti, who's the chief of gender. He's the chief of plastic surgery at Penn Medicine, and he does all these top surgeries, and he said he did 100 of them in the last few years, and that the vast majority were in minors. And he'd only had one person who regretted it, who came back for reconstruction from him. And I lost my train of thought of what I was just saying. But
Okay. Well, so we're talking about the jury. So what was their? So they found the clinicians at fault. What was their award?
$2 million divided 70% the responsibility to Einhorn. So that meant he was responsible for $1.4 million, or his insurance company. And their insurers were there in the audience or whatever you call it.
So $1 million a tit. That sounds pretty good. I would take that.
So, and then, 30% was to Chen. So, yeah.
Okay. And what has the so you wrote this piece for the Free Press. You were the only reporter in the room
for the whole time. There's one other guy from the Epoch Times who found out of it.
Oh, interesting.
I stupidly tweeted in advance that I knew about this because I was the only person who knew, and then he figured it out and followed the breadcrumbs and showed up, and I was very annoying. And I was very snobby.
Never tweet. Never tweet.
I never tweet. I refused to speak to him the entire time. I was a total snob. Looking at, I was furious at myself mostly, just that I clued him in, but
Okay, so what has so you broke the story, but what has been the in the Free Press, what has been the mainstream media response to this coverage?
Well, I mean, I'm very happy that Andrew Jacobs, who's a friend of mine, covered this for the New York Times. So there was that, though I don't think Washington Post, certainly not NPR, CNN, no talk there. So, the right wing's delighted on it.
Are they covering it accurately?
Oh, I don't know that I've read everything, so I can't quite tell. I'm not set, but I get invited to go on all these conservative shows, and I'm like, fine, I'll go on Newsmax, and it's just these crazy libs, So it's hard when they're asking those questions, and I'm just trying to maintain this total neutral face and not nod or just answer a different question, basically. But it's very telling that the requests that I've gotten for comments have been either from heterodox people such as yourself or conservative outlets, and I don't think that the liberal outlets want to admit that this is happening because it's an indictment on them and on the way that they've been covering this for years.
Right.
And just straight down the line, whatever Glad says goes, using all of their words and all those crazy euphemisms that have different political angles baked in, like gender affirming care, that sort of thing. So I don't know when those people are ever going to like self-reflect, but it's not necessarily happening.
Yeah. It seems like the message they're sort of, picking up the message in terms of at least the suicide, their bad messaging on suicide, and we saw this in the Supreme Court
Yeah.
with Trace
Chase
Strangio
Trent, yeah.
admitting in public that, that the evidence that
Oh,
yeah. Go ahead.
but well, okay, so another thing with the ACLU is well, we need to get the ESPS thing, but I have another
Yeah.
thing about the ACLU when we get to that.
Okay, we'll get to that in a
Yeah,
second. So what is this case was not an indictment of WPATH. This
not
was about
explicitly. Mhm.
right, this was about one patient and two clinicians who failed to do their jobs adequately. But what is the broader significance of it?
Well, I think that frankly, under the surface, it is an indictment of the WPATH
Mm,
methods and the gender affirming care methods in particular. And it was unspoken in the trial. No one ever brought up these concepts and where they come from and how
mhm.
they had originated in the Netherlands and they'd evolved in the US and become much more liberal. And then goodbye gatekeeping and all of those attitudes from Joanna Olson Kennedy at all
So
were
none
not
of that was a
mentioned.
part of the trial.
No. So that
Interesting.
there were so many things that made me crazy, things they were saying that were scientifically incorrect. And I was just
Mhm.
sitting there like,
Yeah.
like wanting to be like, shut call out corrections, cause a mistrial, get thrown
Uh-huh.
out. But I think that it was a real indictment implicitly of the gender affirming care method because that's apparently what Einhorn followed. They were only doing what they were following the leaders essentially. So it really what the jury seemed to think was that that the un not they, in the trial was put that they weren't questioning. So that's the same thing as affirmation is not questioning. It's sort of the flip side of that.
Believe
Um,
children.
yeah, and so that's what he was being criticized for, and he
Right.
never used it as his defense, and maybe that's a problem. Maybe it was never that line of argument wasn't permitted by the judge or something. But, it was just sitting there right there for his defense saying, well, I was only doing what I was told by these
Yeah.
larger medical organizations. So I do think, and that's something I do want to write about, to make very clear is at least implicitly, this system really went down here. And I think that the plaintiff's attorney very incorrectly said in his summation that the reason why you don't see regret in other cases is because they follow the standard of care. I'm like, give me a break.
Right.
This guy frankly followed a standard of care that seems very common to me, which is just like
Yeah.
you're trans, great. You want surgery? Let's do it.
Yeah.
That's what these people are being told. That's what Joanna Olson Kennedy does. And if she has a lawsuit against her, that's like far more damning. Although it's run into statute of limitation problem. So the leaders in this field, many of them are all about reducing the
Yeah.
gatekeeping. So
So, you said in the Free Press piece there were, I think, 27 other or 26
it's
other
26. I've
okay,
there's one I knocked off the lip. It's
okay.
26 that I
Alright,
know
so
of.
that you know of. So 26 other detransitioner
Mhm.
lawsuits. Are all of them female to male to female?
No, it varies, and it varies in age. Some of them
Mm,
started when they're quite young. There's the oldest one is 30. So it really varies. And the way that the attorneys behind this put it, and you hear this from like groups like SEGM, the Society for Evidence-Based Gender Medicine, is this idea of it being about children, adolescents, and vulnerable adults. And
mm,
I think that really worries trans activists because they just see people, moving the Overton window or the
yeah,
goalposts, and oh, well, next thing you know, you're going to be posed this for all people. But, I was talking with one attorney, that works in this field, and that's the way he put it. He seemed very sincere that, like, adults can do what they wish, but we are nevertheless concerned about these people who have very severe mental illness
yeah,
and are being given these treatments. But as we saw in the WPATH file, Stan Karasik, who's this I think he's a psychiatrist or a surgeon, but he's in California, and it's in the files that all these message boards for WPATH that were exposed by Michael Schellenberger 2 years ago. And this one care provider is saying, I have concerns about this patient who's like schizophrenic or actively psychotic or something. Should they be put on hormones or should we wait until they like get better or something? And he just like scoffs at her and he says like that is not a contraindication for care. And it's like this prevailing idea of like how dare you discriminate against the severely
yeah.
mental ill and deny them stuff that will make them feel better just because they happen to have psychosis. So
It just it is
and like
mind-blowing to
did
me
you
that
ask the alters? Like that'll
right,
happen. Like
right.
like the
You
alters
wake up
disagree.
yeah,
Uh-oh.
I mean, imagine, like, coming out of your psychotic break and finding out that you cut your penis off. I mean, I
It's
think you'd
like
be
the
pissed at
last
the
scene
surgeon.
in Myra Breckenridge, if anyone knows that.
Right, right. Okay, so there was some other big news in the gender wars this week. 2 major medical organizations came out against gender surgeries for kids. You published a piece about this on in an Unheard. So what's going on there?
So the American Society of Plastic Surgeons, they stood alone as of August of 2024 as the only major U.S. medical organization to at least not endorse the gender
Mm.
affirming care method, surgeries and hormones and blockers. And so that was a big deal at the time. Did it get all the, GLAD and HRC and the ACLU to stop saying that all major medical organizations agree that this stuff is safe and effective for kids? No, it did not.
Okay, so
All
they
those
had
things were
never had an affirming statement.
correct, but they made that very clear and
Okay.
explicit at the time. And there was this Instagram live. If you go onto my Substack, benryan.substack.com, and you search ASPS, you can find this Instagram live that I wrote about. And I put up the audio between Dr. Blair Peters, who's AKA queer surgeon, who's this guy at OHSU. He was interviewing Stephen Williams, the then president of the ASPS, for his Instagram. And they talked all about this. And there was this very telling moment where, well, first of all, Stephen Williams said that he didn't rule out, he said he wouldn't oppose the bans necessarily. He didn't rule, he wouldn't even come out to say that. But Blair Peters was saying, like, oh, gee, if ever there were some problem in our field as plastic surgeons, the doctors would be the first to course correct. And Dr. Williams, who's a black man, points at his face and says, black man, Tuskegee, and like, there's a history of doctors not course correcting. And so
Right.
that was a very interesting moment in history. And by the way, Blair Peters is furious about the ASPS right now. But so
Mm.
the ASPS, they finally come out with their, like, they call it a position statement. It was 9 pages. And they didn't do their own systematic literature review, but they referred to others. There was one that was out of McMaster University that came out last year. It was the only systematic review to look actually at top surgeries. And they found, same with all the other reviews about the hormones and blockers, the evidence is weak and inconclusive. And of
Mhm.
course, then there was a paroxysm within McMaster. The activists attacked them. Gordon Guy at the head of this whole thing, disavowed them as a total crisis. In any case, the ASPS comes out on Tuesday in this document, says, based on the weakness of the evidence and all the balancing of the evidence versus the harms and benefits, we think that it's in the best interest of our members, there are 11,000 members of the ASPS, that you defer gender transition surgeries until 19. And that's a very weird verb to
Yeah.
use because it implies that you're just going to wait and do it later as
Right.
opposed to, not doing it now and then maybe not doing it later either because you change your mind. So then the National Review, they call up the American Medical Association, the AMA, and say, what do you think of this? And the AMA says, we agree. And just like that, the lemmings start running that way. And
Mhm.
it just says like all of that the mirage of unanimity all comes from just a few tiny committees at a few leading organizations
Yeah.
making this decision, and then all the others follow suit.
Right.
And now the ASBS is saying, actually, no, in the AMA, it was that easy. So
Yeah.
Blair Peters, he goes on Instagram yesterday, or on Threads, he throws a fit, and he's so upset that it was only a small closed committee with no transparency that decided
Interesting.
that we're opposed to this, and this is not reflective of that. They did not poll the whole membership.
Right.
Well, I don't know about other organizations, but what I can tell you about the American Academy of Pediatrics is that a very small committee,
Yeah.
one person wrote their 2018 position statement on the
Right.
gender affirming care method, which has been subject to scathing critiques showing how it's like incorrect and the citations contradict it. And it was edited by a small committee, but it only has one author,
Right.
Jason Rafferty, who was a resident at the time. And Julia Mason is this dissident at the AAP who's tried to force them to vote on this many times, and they have blocked her with all these parliamentarian moves. And so guess what? The American Academy of Pediatrics has never polled its members about its own statement. So it seems that your policies on this are very flexible based on what the
Right.
outcome is.
It also seems like the policies should not be sort of the end all and be all. I mean, they're basically a shorthand for
Mhm.
media and activists to say every major American
Oh,
group.
well, so
Yeah.
the ACLU has recently, I forget if it was in December or January, but they have a press release out about one of their cases that they're involved with. And they say this, they say, every major organization agrees, blah, blah, blah. So I emailed their press people Tuesday morning, and I knew that the ASPS guidance was coming out at 1, but I couldn't tell them yet. But I said,
Mhm.
what's up with this quote? This is wrong. And here's how we know that because the ASPS, has
Yeah.
not endorsed this. And they tried to loyally weasel the way out of it, saying that I was taking it out of context, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, and then I wrote them back once the news broke, and I said, well, the ASPS is now opposed to it. Do you have
Yeah.
anything to say now? And they didn't respond. Nor did
They'll start
GLAAD.
saying 99%. So what has
Yeah.
been the response to these announcements by trans activists
Yeah.
and sort of our typical trans
Oh,
unskeptical media?
well,
Are they
yeah,
talking about it?
All 100. mostly no. I mean, the blue
Mhm.
skyites that they tried to ignore the court case mostly. But with the ASPS thing, Alejandra Caraballo, the very aggressive trans activist who rules the roost on Blue Sky, she started just bitching and moaning about how well teens can get their nose done and breast surgery and all the ASPS members are doing that and like what's the big
Right.
deal? And I'm like, well, several things, Alejandra Caraballo.
You don't
After
breastfeed out of your nose.
Right, you can smell after you get your nose done, unless you're Michael Jackson, which case your nose just falls off. But speaking of body dysmorphia, I
Yeah.
once had a therapist who said it's a shame that Michael Jackson had the resources to find people who would give him,
Yes.
deviate from the standard of care and provide
Right.
him stuff that he shouldn't be having. But yeah, it's offensive to me. And this came up in the summation where the defense, his name was Neil Kornfeld for Dr. Einhorn. He said, the plaintiff's attorney never presented any experts to say, what the consequences of having this mastectomy were. She never really talked about what she can still, work and do
Right.
things with, or, around town or whatever. Well, Adam Deutsch gets out the plaintiff's attorney, and he's just like, and I was thinking the same thing. He's like, how would you like if I came here and took off your penis? Would I have to explain to you? Would I have to bring in an expert to tell you what that meant? Four of the 6 people on the jury were women, and he goes,
Mhm.
that is offensive. And
Mhm.
I was like, crossing my legs and thinking, "Huh," and you can't breastfeed. And Prisha Mosley,
Right.
who's one of the most prominent detransitioners, she had similar story, had her breast removed, and she was a teenager. And she has recently had a baby, and she's described in really painful detail about she still does have some milk ducts, but they're not connected to her nipples. So she was having milk production without the ability to expel it, and it was
Ooh.
very painful.
Yeah.
So the I think Fox didn't go in too much detail about what it means to not have her breasts, but again, like, did she really need to? But
Right.
I would like to say, if anyone is listening who poo-poos or dismisses, this case in particular, or just the idea, what's the big deal of having a mastectomy? So what if
Right.
you regret it? You listen to and then look in the eye of the mother of this child and the agony she suffered, and the regret over trusting her kid to this therapist who had coerced her in her words. You look into these people's eyes and you tell them that their suffering doesn't mean anything.
Well, or just talk to women. It's not as though double mastectomies are an uncommon
Yeah,
surgery.
it's all
Talk
the
to a
time.
woman who has had breast cancer. Not everybody is Tig Notaro.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
I would be if and when I get breast cancer. I
Oh, I
think
get
for
bigger
me,
ones. I have a friend who had that,
that's your
and she
top
was like,
surgery. You get
she
implants.
was like a B cup or something. She's like, oh yeah, no, I'm gonna get the reconstruction. Just give it a B, and then she's like, on second thought, you know,
I'd go the opposite direction. I'd be full Marilyn
yeah.
Manson. Okay, so in terms of these of the the surgeons and the AMA, so do you have what is your sense of what is driving this change? Are these
Yeah,
groups looking at the data? Are they shifting with the political winds? Are they scared of lawsuits?
yeah. Well, one
Is it
of
just
the
the vibe shift?
I don't know, one of the
Did they
attorneys I
listen to
talked
this
to,
podcast? Did they
they
follow
must.
you on Twitter?
It's because
Okay.
of you. It's because of you, Katie. Uh,
Oh my
one of the attorneys I talked to, he thought, and currently it's an attorney talking and not a surgeon. He said that he thought that gender surgeries for minors or people under 19, because it was actually the ASPS interestingly chose 19 as their cutoff, which is in line with the Trump administration. And I
Right,
asked
yeah.
a former president of their foundation about that. He assured me that it wasn't political, that they were independent. That's what he said. Take that for what you will. But he said this litigator I talked to said that he thought that those surgeries would just end as of Tuesday because of fear of lawsuits, because this document is just, carte blanche to sue, and that we told you not to, and you went right ahead
Yeah,
and did it. So it's hard to
yeah.
say, but we do know that the ASPS has been preparing this document for a long time, and they have been, reviewing all the other evidence reviews and listening to the CAS review out of Britain and that sort of thing. As for the AMA, this is just my guess. Like, that seems vibe shift, and the ASPS, I don't think had anything to do with the trial. That was a coincidence
Mhm.
of timing. They might have known about the trial and said, "Let's wait until afterward." But like, the
Right,
trial isn't why they did this. Whereas
right.
the AMA, that's possible. I'm just guessing here that they
Yeah,
were influenced by the trial and seeing lawsuits, and they don't want to be on the wrong side of history now that the history's going the other direction. I
yeah.
don't know, but
Okay,
yeah.
so, you're in your writing, you are more of a straight down the line
I
reporter
try to
than
be.
a
I try to be.
yeah, than a bloviator like I
Yeah.
am, but would you be willing to tell us what the Ben Ryan take
Mhm.
on gender affirming care or sex
Yeah.
changes for minors?
Yeah, and Megan Down asked me the same question. So essentially my response is that, well, if you look at the state of the evidence, and there's a lot of fair criticism saying that you're raising the standards, the bar that we have to clear. There's so many different situations of pediatrics where you have low quality evidence. And also,
Mhm.
here's what those words means. Like it's called a grade system. That's an acronym, and it's a way of analyzing scientific evidence to try to assess its reliability. And so the strength is related to its reliability. So it's very low, low, medium, and high quality. And what very low means that whatever the result in the study is, we have absolutely no idea if that's a reflection of what it would be in real world practice. And then you go up the scale, and then you like at high, you have a very high level of certainty. So that's what those seemingly colloquial terms actually mean. So here's the thing. Yeah, if you have there are different circumstances when it's okay to use low quality evidence and to make, strong recommendations. If the person would absolutely die no matter what tomorrow, and we might as well just try this thing
Right.
anyway, that's one circumstance. Or if there's a reasonable alternative. So the strength of the evidence behind knowing that you shouldn't get aspirin to kids for fevers because of Ray's syndrome, that actually has weak evidence behind it, but you
Mhm.
don't need stronger evidence because you can just give them Tylenol. There's a
Right.
reasonable alternative. So there are all these different pairings of situations in which it is okay, under the evidence-based medicine system and medical ethics to do these things. With gender medicine for kids, like, okay, low quality
Mhm.
evidence, but now we're talking about potentially ending their fertility, in the case of surgery, absolutely ending their ability to breastfeed and other,
Sexual function.
potentially losing sexual function. And then other questions that we don't have the answers to, the unknowns, the unknown risks. Those are also, we don't really know necessarily puberty blockers. And people think that, for one thing, prescribing puberty blockers to delay puberty past its optimal set point is very different from delaying it to its optimal set point if someone starts going to puberty when they're 5. So I really
Right.
resent people trying to compare those two.
Right.
Like, because we know about one, therefore we know about the
Right.
other. So England is trying to study this if they can get their clinical trial off the ground to do their brain study about puberty blockers. But, with all of these risks, the question is, i- under what dynamics is it ethical to end the fertility or potentially the sexual function of a minor? And, there was throughout until recently, it really was only like 50, I think it was like 1973, like there was an absolute categorical ban on involuntary sterilizations.
Mhm.
Gender medicine only started like 25 years later for kids. So those two things like almost overlap in terms of like history being broad. So, all right, we've established the Nazis are bad, eugenics is terrible. We shouldn't have done this. Even, the mentally incompetent, as they were once called, have a right to bodily autonomy and
Right.
they can have kids if they want. And if you have a problem with that, like get over it. And
Right.
yet we flip the script with kids. So so the answer is like, well, as a survivor of testicular cancer, I had to have one of my gonads removed or I would have died. And because I had stage 2, it got past the testicle, I had a 90%, it was like a 90% chance of dying within 1 year if I had the chemotherapy hadn't come in to save me. So that's nice that I didn't die. But,
Mhm.
in that case, I had to do fertility preservation. So it wasn't, they're like, you want to do nobody said, do you want chemo?
Right. Right.
Nobody asked me that. Like, it was
Right.
what would be the point? It's like, you don't want to die? Okay, we're gonna start on Tuesday. So,
Right.
um, when you have, a life or death question, and including with children, like, absolutely, you don't want them to die. But there is no life or death question with kids. That's why this whole suicide specter gets thrown in. It puts the finger on the scale and then makes parents get their blinders on and then they consent. But nobody can have a rational conversation about risks and benefits in the face of the evidence quality when you're throwing in these suicide
Right.
threats, which are not backed up by evidence. And granted, just to make clear, like, yes, gender dysphoric youth do have a very high rate of suicidality and suicide attempts, but their actual suicide death rate is, it's higher than the age match controls, but it seems to be associated not with the gender dysphoria, but with their comorbid mental health conditions. And granted, there's all these overlaps and the directionality and questions about that. And I think those are worthwhile questions. But the only study to actually analyze deaths out of Finland found that there was no association between these treatments and a difference in the suicide death, not a statistically significant one anyway. And also that the suicide deaths are still rare. So this idea of this live son or dead daughter, that implies they're almost certain to kill themselves.
Right.
And
Right.
that's absolutely categorically false.
Well, and it's a terrible message to give to not just parents, but children.
Mhm.
You are
Yeah,
going to kill
suicide.
yourself if you don't get
You
get
talk
this
about
thing that
social
you want.
contagion.
Right.
Suicide is very socially contagious. You hear about like that Polynesian island where people kept throwing themselves from the volcano. You know, So, just talking about it this way, and then the media is culpable for this as well.
Yeah,
That just puts the ideas that you are expected to kill yourself. And in
right.
fact, there was like I can't remember if it was an AAP or WFPATH conference, but there was somebody who got up and described a transgender youth bravely throwing herself in front of a train. She later
Mm,
apologized, but
mhm.
she glamorized, she valorized
Yeah,
suicide
yeah,
as being sort of
yeah.
impressive for the cause.
Yeah, every time we talk about suicide contagion, we get emails from Chris Ferguson, he's a doubter.
Oh,
He's
no.
an so I think the and he's we've
I
had some
think I've
interesting
heard from
conversations.
him.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we've had some
He's
interesting conversations with
yeah.
him, but it is certainly against best practices,
Yeah.
when you're media to report
Well, the
on
next
things like
Benedict reporting was just absolutely categorically
egregious, egregiously bad.
egregious.
Yeah,
It's so
yeah,
embarrassing. I can't
yeah,
even begin to describe it. And when they found out, like, oh, she took a bunch of Benadryl,
mm,
um, and if you watch the tape of Nex in the hospital with the cop, seems okay, doesn't seem that beat up. And Nex, by the way, started the fight.
right, yeah, terrible reporting
Not
on
that
this,
anyone
and
deserves
then
to die because they started
of
fighting. I'm
course,
not saying that,
of course.
but the fact of the matter is we don't really necessarily know why Nex killed herself.
Right.
But, her father had just gotten out of prison, and there was abuse, and there were
Yeah.
all these elements of the story that nobody talked about because it wasn't convenient for the narrative.
Right. Well, and nobody follow when this news came out later that it was that Next Benedict was not killed by other people,
Right.
that it was a drug overdose, and
Benadryl.
there had been these, other factors at home, a very
They just stopped
unstable
talking
home
about it.
life, just stop talking about it. Just
Mhm.
stop talking about it. Okay, so, you are, let's say, not super popular among trans activists on social
Yeah.
media. But I have also seen some dust-ups between you and Twitter TERFs, particularly
Oh,
over
yeah.
language.
Yeah.
So what's your pronoun policy?
Yeah, I mean, I do prefer pronouns. I just, the whole like be kind thing has really been weaponized. But yeah, I
Yeah,
think it's important to be nice to people and not alienate them and just not be rude. Like you can handle a little cognitive dissonance with calling someone she, even though you know that they're biologically male, and that's fine. So yeah, I don't think the idea that if let's say you have some sex crime trial
mhm.
that before they're convicted, it's okay to switch their pronouns because of what they've been accused of. But if they've been convicted, I'm like, yeah, I'm fine with that.
Yeah, we've seen trials I've heard about trials where a victim has been compelled by a
Yeah, we
judge to
have seen that.
use
So they
that's
just
what I
don't
don't
use any
like. Yeah.
pronouns. Yeah, that's a
I
lot.
don't like the pronoun policing on either
Yeah,
side. I talked about this
me
with John
neither.
Kay on the show a couple
Yeah,
weeks
yeah, that
ago.
was a great episode.
Thank you. The just this idea that, that we heard from trans activists for years, you must use people's preferred pronouns. Don't
Mhm.
tell me what to fucking say, but I feel that exact same way about Twitter TERFs who
Yeah,
get mad that we do use people's preferred
yeah.
pronouns in the majority of cases.
I've
Not all
blocked like
cases.
I've blocked well over 1,000 pronoun police members,
Yeah.
and my life on Twitter is so much more calm as a
Yeah.
result, like Graham Linehan and all those people. So
Yes, yes. Grandma, yeah.
and
Interesting fella.
Joanna Gold or not Joanna, different Joanna. J.K. Rowling dragged me over my pronoun policy on Gay Pride Day last summer, and that was quite
And
the
during
event.
Pride.
Is that during
Okay,
Pride?
do you think looking back now, do you think that the gender wars are we wrapping this up? Is it over? The Free Press published a
Mm,
perspective
yeah.
yesterday that it was a bit of a victory lap. What did you
Yep.
think?
It's funny because often you'll hear the trans activist writers like Evan Urquhart accuse like the Times of writing a victory lap just because there was some bit of news about gender, and it's always false. He's always just claiming that. In this case, Emily Yoffe 100% wrote a victory lap, and saying like we were out there out front writing the stuff, and you were the first one that wrote a piece about I guess it was compelled pronouns in
Yeah.
academia a few years ago. Oh God, hard to say what's next. I mean, for one thing, Trump too will ultimately end, and then the dust will settle.
Mhm.
Maybe we'll have a Democratic president. So then, what happens then?
Yeah.
And I think that tort law might be the answer of what keeps this industry at bay.
Yeah.
Is fear of lawsuits and the expense of malpractice, or maybe not. I'm not really sure, but no. I mean, I think that a year ago, people who write in this space were asking one another, like, where do we go from here? Trump's being totalitarian. It's like there's plenty of else to talk about across the political spectrum. So we'll see.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I think that my position on this has basically always been that I think that there is a small number of people who experience gender dysphoria, and there's a large number of people who are a larger number of people who have hopped onto the trend, and
Mhm.
trends end. That is the nature of trends,
Mhm.
and I think that we are seeing the end of the trend.
Maybe. Mhm.
But I also, yeah, this is a political issue, and this is America. We are the politics of backlash. So it depends on who is the next president. If
Yeah.
it's if it's a Republican, if it's JD Vance, God forbid, we will see. It will be another 8 years
Yeah.
of similar, if not more, draconian policies targeting trans people. And I do think there was so much rhetoric during the Biden administration about how trans people were under attack, and during the first Trump administration. And I thought a lot of it was overblown. And I no longer think that it is as overblown. I think that trans people, from the perspective of the federal government, are under attack.
Absolutely.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. And I feel for them. I do. I
Yeah.
do think it's a little bit their fault. I mean, not the fault of like the individual
Mhm.
trans people, but the activists who have pushed and pushed and pushed on issues like
Right. It's
sports
like
and kids in a way that like was always going to result in exactly what has happened. But so yeah, when it comes to the future, I do think that I don't know, I see fewer people coming out as trans. There was a wave of, like, I felt like should keep a spreadsheet and just, like, update it fucking weekly, because so many of the dykes that I knew were coming out as non-binary or as
mhm.
they, them. I just don't see that anymore.
Mm.
I don't see people announcing that their kids are trans as much anymore. And maybe that is fear. It's people going back into the closet
Right.
because they have some genuine fears about what that means. But I think also it's just part of it is like trends are trendy and trends end.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, Gene Twenge and,
Hmm.
Kaufman, what I can't remember,
Eric
Alexander Kaufman
Kaufman.
or Eric Kaufman
Yeah.
put out these various analyses, and Eric Kaufman's needed a little work, in terms of how he with the conclusions he drew from them. But
Yeah.
Twenge, I think,
Yeah.
did a better job of suggesting that at least with non-binary identities,
Yeah.
those are starting to fade.
I think his conclusion was correct. His way of getting there was wrong,
Exactly.
but he
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Yeah. So we'll see. All right, Ben, thank you so much. I
All right.
really
And
appreciate it.
I
And
just
thank
want to
you everybody for
apologize that I know you wanted Michael Hobbs to come on, but
Oh yeah.
so I just
Well,
had to fill
you're
in the
the
last
second
minute.
best.
So,
All right.
so
Yeah. Thanks, Ben, and thanks for
thanks
everybody for joining.
everyone. All right. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.
All right, how do I turn this off? All right, folks, I don't know how to turn this off, so I'm just gonna close my computer. Oh wait, end. All right. Thanks everyone. Bye.